Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
She waited until the exact moment the champagne touched my lips, when my fiancé had just leaned in to whisper something sweet about the future, and when the whole room had that soft, breathless energy right before someone gives a toast that everyone will remember. She stood up holding her glass, her hand resting just under her belly like some Victorian heroine. And with a smile I hadn't seen since the last time she ruined something of mine, she said, "Before we celebrate them, I have something to share. I'm pregnant." And just like that, the air shifted. Clapping erupted. Someone shrieked with joy. My aunt wiped a tear, and my mother looked at her as if Olivia had just solved world hunger. All the while, I sat there with a smile glued so tight to my face, it might as well have been stapled on, nodding like a woman who wasn't watching the last ounce of joy get vacuumed out of the night she had dreamed about since she was 16. What struck me the most wasn't that she did it. That was predictable, in a way that only someone who had grown up with her would truly understand. But that she waited for the exact knife-edged moment, as if she had rehearsed it in front of the mirror, practicing the way she'd tilt her head and the breathy way she'd say pregnant. Like it was a spell that made everyone forget why we were gathered there in the first place. And the worst part? It worked. People cheered. People gathered around her. Someone handed her another glass of champagne and joked about one last sip before mommyhood. Even Michael, who was still holding my hand under the table, looked stunned, like someone had just walked onto a stage during a wedding proposal and started juggling. It wasn't shock that she had news. It was that she stole the script. Later in the car, as we sat in silence with the radio playing some soft rock song neither of us liked, I stared out the window and remembered a different party, my high school graduation. That night, Olivia had walked into the backyard, wearing a white sundress, holding hands with her then-boyfriend Scott, and announced they were moving in together. Just like that, the celebration swiveled. My diploma might as well have been a napkin. Everyone crowded around her, asking where, how, when, and I remember smiling, nodding, even hugging her, pretending I didn't care. But I did. I always did. And as the years went on, I learned to swallow those feelings because Olivia wasn't evil. She was just Olivia. Dramatic, emotional, a scene stealer in the most elegant way, like a magician who always left you unsure whether you were angry or impressed. Back at the party, after the crowd thinned and people began drifting toward the dessert table, I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared into the mirror. My lipstick was smeared. My eyes were watery, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I looked at my reflection and saw not a bride-to-be, not someone who had just been proposed to in front of friends and family, but a supporting character in someone else's story. And that realization was what hurt the most. Not the timing, not the manipulation, but the confirmation that this wasn't new. This was the pattern. And I was tired of playing along. Michael knocked on the door, asked if I was okay, and when I said yes, I could hear that he didn't believe me, but didn't know what else to do. He was kind, in that quiet, dependable way that doesn't make a scene. And he had never quite believed me about Olivia's habits. To him, she was just a little theatrical, but tonight, I saw the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. The first moment he understood that this wasn't random, that she hadn't simply gotten excited and blurted out her big news. No, she had planned it, down to the hour, down to the minute, down to the beat between my name and her announcement. We left the party early, claiming I had a headache, and in the car, as the city lights blurred by and Michael fiddled with the air conditioning like it might fix the silence, I said one thing, just one. I looked over at him and said, "I think we should change the date." He blinked, confused. "Change the wedding date?" I nodded. "I want to move it, sooner." He asked why, and I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have a reason, but because I had too many. I went to bed that night with a plan forming in the back of my mind. Not fully formed, not even close. But I had a feeling, a push. An itch that told me the game had finally started. For once, I wasn't going to sit quietly and watch her rearrange my life with a smile and an oops. For once, I wasn't going to play the peacekeeper. She had drawn first blood in public on my night with a toast that made people forget whose hand the ring was on. So now, it was my turn to give them something they wouldn't forget. And as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to Michael's soft breathing beside me, I thought about her Pinterest board, the one she showed me last year after a bottle of wine and a half-hearted apology for missing my birthday. She had described her dream wedding in detail: the vineyard, the color palette, the lace she wanted on her dress. She even named the exact venue. But it books out years in advance, she had said, sighing like a little girl with her nose against a candy store window. I reached for my phone in the dark and typed the name into Google. There it was, the very vineyard. And then I saw it, available dates. Only one Saturday left in the entire season. Just one, her chosen date. I smiled for real this time, not the forced kind, not the mirror-trained grin I'd been using all evening. No, this was different. It was quiet. It was sharp. And it felt like the first real thing I'd felt all night. Let the games begin. By the time morning light began creeping through the thin slats of our bedroom blinds, casting long shadows across the floor and illuminating the remains of yesterday's carefully applied makeup that I hadn't bothered to wash off, my mind was already deep in calculation. Not in bitterness, though it was there, simmering just under the surface like a pot you haven't watched boil, but in strategy, in the kind of cold clarity that comes not from rage, but from the numb space that follows disappointment, where decisions grow like ice crystals around everything that used to feel warm. Michael was still asleep, one arm draped across his chest like he was guarding something, and I sat beside him, knees pulled to my chest, phone in hand, staring again at the vineyard listing I had bookmarked the night before, rereading every detail like it was a contract I was preparing to sign. Not just with the venue, but with myself. I had never been the kind of woman to go for vengeance, never the type to hold a grudge or play chess with people's feelings. If anything, I was the one who absorbed things quietly, turned slights into jokes, and excused bad behavior as quirks. Olivia counted on that. Everyone did. They built a version of me that didn't bite back, and it made things easier for them. But something about the way her voice sounded over the clinking of glasses, the precise timing of her announcement, the smug glance she shot me after the room erupted in applause, it didn't just hurt. It burned something clean away inside me, like acid on fabric, and I was left with something raw and unapologetic underneath. When Michael finally stirred and rubbed his eyes like a man trying to wake from something heavier than sleep, I turned to him and asked again, only this time without the ambiguity, without the cryptic tone that begged him to understand what I meant without saying it. I want to move our wedding date, I said, my voice flat but unwavering. And when he opened his mouth to ask why, I held up my phone and showed him the screen. This place, this date, I want it. He blinked, then furrowed his brow in that way he always did when he was trying to decide if I was joking or serious, and I watched the tension form behind his eyes like a pressure building in a sealed jar. Rachel, he said slowly, carefully, that's the exact date Olivia told everyone she picked. You want to take it? No, I said, leaning forward. My eyes locked on his like I needed him to understand this wasn't impulse or pettiness. I want to book the venue we both liked, but crossed off our list because she said it was hers. I want to stop making room for someone who never once made space for me. And for a long moment, he just looked at me, his face unreadable, and then he nodded, not because he fully agreed, but because somewhere inside, he was beginning to see the outlines of the same picture I had been staring at for years. We called the venue by 9. The woman on the phone was polite and efficient, and when she asked if we had a preferred date, I said it clearly, without hesitation. There was a pause, just a beat, and then she confirmed that yes, it was still available, and that we'd need to submit the deposit by end of day to lock it in. I thanked her, gave her my email, and when I hung up, there was a strange stillness in the room. like the moment before a storm when the air gets heavy and you know something irreversible has been set in motion. By noon, I had an email confirmation, a digital contract, and a copy of the venue brochure sitting in my inbox. And with every passing second, I felt less like someone who had been wronged and more like someone who had reclaimed something that was hers to begin with. The only thing left to do was tell Olivia, not because she deserved a warning, but because she would find out anyway, and I preferred it come from me. I didn't call. That would have given her a stage, and I had no interest in handing her another mic. Instead, I texted her with the same cold precision she had used to detonate my engagement night. Hi, Olivia. Just letting you know Michael and I finalized our venue this morning. We ended up booking Ridgewell Vineyards for June 15th. Hope that doesn't overlap with your plans. And then I turned off my phone. The explosion, when it came, was immediate. I turned it back on an hour later and found 7 missed calls, 3 voice messages, and a flood of texts that started polite and quickly spiraled into something furious and barely coherent. The best one, though, the one that made me laugh so suddenly I startled Michael, was simple. You booked my date at my venue. Are you seriously that desperate for attention? It was rich, coming from her. I didn't respond, not right away. I let her stew, let the silence wrap around her like a mirror she couldn't stop looking into. But eventually, when the text turned from fury to guilt-tripping, when she started pulling the "but I'm pregnant and hormonal and you're stressing me out" card, I replied, "Just curious, do you think being pregnant gives you permanent VIP access to everyone else's milestones? Or does the entitlement expire after delivery?" She didn't answer. For almost a full day, nothing. And then, of course, she pulled the family card. My mother called the next morning, her voice soft and sugar-dipped, like she was trying to broker peace between 2 countries that she had accidentally armed. "Rachel, honey, I know Olivia's announcement was poorly timed, but maybe you could consider changing the date for the sake of family harmony." I stared at the phone, almost in awe of how quickly the narrative had shifted from Olivia ambushing my engagement to me being the one who needed to apologize for booking a venue. So I said what I had been holding in for years. "Mom, I'm not interested in harmony that only works when one person never raises her voice." And I hung up. That night, Michael and I popped a bottle of wine, one we had been saving for the wedding planning, and sat on the couch flipping through design catalogs. I showed him Olivia's Pinterest board, the color palette, the lace, the arch of flowers she said was so Ridgewell. And as we scrolled, I saw him smile, really smile, for the first time since the engagement toast. "Are we really doing this?" he asked. "We already did," I said, raising my glass. "Here's to giving her exactly what she deserves." And as we clinked glasses, I knew something Olivia hadn't figured out yet. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to scream. Sometimes it just needs to be beautifully timed. When I first saw the message from Olivia that simply read, "We need to talk," I almost didn't open it, not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I had anticipated the exact tone, the specific language, and even the order in which she'd try to claw back control. So perfectly that reading it felt like confirming a script I had already memorized. She wasn't reaching out for clarity, closure, or even an honest conversation. She was preparing her next move, likely one laced in faux diplomacy, strained sisterhood, and the kind of self-righteous victimhood that she could weaponize with an alarming amount of charm, especially in the eyes of people who didn't know her the way I did. But still, I opened it, more curious than anything, because I wanted to see how she would attempt to spin a story where she had hijacked my engagement night, and I had simply booked a venue. Her message began with a casual tone, as though we were just 2 brides comparing notes, not 2 women now headed directly for the same altar on the same day. She wrote, "I just heard from Mom that you went ahead and booked Ridgewell. Honestly, I was surprised because I told you that was the venue we were looking at. I'm hoping this was just a scheduling mix-up because I know you wouldn't intentionally try to overlap with our date. Let me know if we can talk this through. Maybe we can figure out a compromise that makes sense for both of us." It was so calculated, so surgically precise in its innocence, that for a moment I sat there in genuine admiration. not because I was impressed by her manipulation, but because it confirmed everything I already knew about how she operated. She wanted to frame it as a misunderstanding, to set the stage so that if things got ugly, she could still play the gracious sister who tried to work it out. I didn't reply that day, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed her to stew in the ambiguity of silence, to sit with the possibility that I was no longer operating by the rules she had relied on since childhood. Rules where I deferred, I absorbed, I stayed quiet. The next day, I posted a photo of Michael and me touring Ridgewell on Instagram. No caption, no explanation. Just the two of us standing under the arched trellis, the vineyard rose behind us stretching into a golden haze, and her favorite flower, the pale pink ranunculus, accidentally visible in the mock-up bouquet I held. It took less than 20 minutes for her to call. I didn't answer. Her voicemail was a crescendo of outrage wrapped in disbelief, starting with, "I can't believe you would actually do this," and ending with, "You've always been jealous, and this just proves it." That last part made me laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because of the absurdity of her thinking I had spent my life coveting the chaos she created wherever she went. Olivia was the kind of person who mistook noise for importance, applause for love, and attention for stability. What I envied wasn't her. It was the way people still defended her, still made excuses, still looked at me like I was overreacting every time I pointed out the landmines she planted in everyone else's lives while dancing around them in heels. A few days later, the family group chat, normally a wasteland of forwarded birthday memes and chain prayers, lit up like a wildfire. My mother, in her usual "let's pretend we're a happy family" tone, suggested we all get together and find a way to avoid conflict, because surely we can't have two sisters fighting over something as beautiful as a wedding. I didn't even bother replying, but Michael did. In one cool, composed message, he wrote, "We've confirmed our date and venue. We're not changing anything. If Olivia wants to celebrate her pregnancy with a wedding, she's free to choose any of the other 364 days available on the calendar." And with that, he exited the chat. It was the first time I'd seen him step in like that. Not just as my partner, but as someone who was drawing a line in the sand. Not because he was trying to defend me, but because he had finally stopped trying to play the referee in a game he now understood was rigged from the start. That night, as we sat on the patio sipping wine, I told him about Olivia's Pinterest board, the vineyard shots, the color swatches, the lace veil she wanted custom made to match the wisteria that blooms in June. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "You really want to do it exactly how she imagined?" And I said without hesitation, "No, I want to do it better." Over the next few weeks, we worked with the Ridgewell coordinator to refine every detail, not with the goal of replicating Olivia's dream, but of creating something so elegant, so effortlessly perfect, that it would haunt her not because it was stolen, but because it was executed in a way she never could have pulled off. The guest list was tight. No drama, no pageantry, just people who loved us, respected our space, and didn't see us as second billing to a pregnancy announcement. I sent formal invitations to everyone except Olivia. She received a digital RSVP link with no +1 option and a message that read, "We understand if you can't attend given the schedule overlap. Wishing you all the best either way." She never responded. Then about a month before the wedding, I got a call from a mutual friend, Lauren, someone who had always floated between us, close enough to be at every family event, but distant enough to stay out of the mess. She said, "So, Olivia's trying to book another vineyard. Apparently she's telling people she had Ridgewell on hold, but you swooped in and took it." I nearly choked on my coffee. "On hold?" I asked. She never even contacted them. I asked the coordinator. They'd never heard of her. Lauren paused, then sighed. "Look, I'm not taking sides, but people are talking. She's making you out to be ruthless." I smiled, though there was no one to see it. "Let them talk," I said. "It's about time." And so the new narrative began to form. Not one of the quiet, long-suffering younger sister, but of the cold, calculating bride who stole a venue out of spite. And you know what? I didn't care. because for the first time in my life, Olivia didn't control the story. I did, and I wasn't done writing. There's a specific silence that follows the shattering of a family illusion, an eerie, echoing kind of quiet that isn't peaceful or restful, but rather tense and artificial, like the forced hush inside a house right after someone slams a door and everyone pretends nothing happened. That was the silence that settled over our family group chats, phone calls, and weekend catch-ups after the invitations went out, and Olivia realized, too late, that the world she had always orchestrated to revolve around her had begun to shift its axis, not because I made a scene, not because I shouted or accused or lashed out, but because I had finally refused to play her audience. And unlike every other time she'd staged one of her grand emotional performances, this time no one clapped at the end. At first, she tried to salvage it by pretending she hadn't noticed the overlap, as if our wedding hadn't been scheduled directly on top of her tentative plans, and at the very venue she had once drunkenly called her fairy tale finish line. She began dropping subtle hints to our extended family, saying things like, "It's so funny that Rachel and I both love the same place. What are the odds?" Or, "I hadn't officially booked, so I'm not mad. But it is a little weird, right?" She painted herself as gracious, wounded, and above the drama, which was a clever move because it baited people into seeing her as the peacemaker, just long enough for her to prepare the next blow. But the thing about people like Olivia is they can't maintain that facade for long, especially not when they feel the ground beneath them shifting. And within a week, the mask began to slip. The first real crack came when she posted a cryptic Instagram story. A black screen with the text, "Some people will literally destroy your joy just to make themselves feel important," followed by a sad face and a heart. No names, no tags, nothing overt. But everyone knew. She made sure of that. Within hours, I had 3 cousins texting me asking if everything was okay and whether it was true that I had stolen Olivia's wedding date. I didn't explain, I didn't defend. I simply sent them a screenshot of my confirmation email with the timestamp, and that was that. The next day, her story was gone, replaced by a filtered selfie and a caption about choosing peace, which, in Olivia's language, usually meant she'd lost the upper hand, for now. But where she really began to unravel was in her relationship with her fiancé, Daniel, a man I had met twice before and who always struck me as the kind of person who mistook passivity for patience. A man who went along to get along until the situation required actual conviction. Apparently, according to Lauren, the same mutual friend who had kept me updated on Olivia's vineyard search, Daniel had grown noticeably distant, not because he objected to a wedding per se, but because he was uncomfortable with how Olivia was handling it. He told her maybe it's better to wait till after the baby, Lauren said, during one of our late-night phone calls. And she lost it, said you were trying to erase her, and that he didn't care enough to fight for her spotlight. That conversation played over in my mind for days, not because I took pleasure in their struggle, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like justice, but because it revealed something I hadn't expected. Even Olivia's own world was cracking under the pressure she put on it. And as I watched her flail to reclaim the narrative, trying every angle from emotional manipulation to martyrdom, I began to understand something essential, not just about her, but about myself. All those years I spent making room for her, cushioning her missteps, laughing off her sabotages as bad timing or just Olivia being Olivia. I hadn't been keeping the peace. I had been feeding the myth of her golden child status. And now, by simply stepping out of the shadows, I had broken it. Michael, for his part, was quietly proud. He didn't say much, didn't gloat or mock, but I could see the shift in the way he looked at me, like he was seeing the full picture for the first time, not just the pleasant, agreeable version of me that fit well into his structured, polite world, but the woman who could plan her wedding with the same precision as a chess player laying traps. He helped me finalize every detail, down to the cake flavor Olivia had once said was too sophisticated for our family, which of course we chose. And when I asked him, half jokingly, if he thought I was going too far, he answered without missing a beat, "You're not going far enough." There was a moment, though, a strange and unexpectedly emotional moment that caught me off guard. It came when I was sorting through old photos, looking for something to include on a memory table at the reception, and I found a picture of Olivia and me at our grandparents' lake house, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wrapped in matching beach towels, faces flushed from sun and sugar. We were laughing, really laughing, and it struck me that once upon a time, before all the competition and the performance and the constant one-upmanship, we had simply been sisters. Not rivals, not actresses in each other's tragedies, just girls. And for a brief second, I felt something close to grief. Not regret, but mourning for a version of us that could have been. I didn't put the photo on the table. Instead, I tucked it back into the bag, closed the lid, and reminded myself that nostalgia is a dangerous drug. It makes you forget the bruises by only showing you the sunlight. And I had no use for delusions in a season where I had finally chosen truth, clarity, and boundaries over tradition, appeasement, and silence. Then, 1 week before the wedding, Olivia sent a message, not to me, but to Michael. It was long, rambling, and filled with emotionally loaded language about family, legacy, and how much she had supported us over the years. But near the end, it shifted. She wrote, "Rachel has always had a way of holding things in until she explodes. I just wish she would have come to me directly instead of orchestrating this display. You're marrying someone who keeps score, and I hope you're ready for what that means long term." Michael showed me the message, then blocked her, and as I watched his finger press the screen, as simple and final as clicking a lock, I realized that this wasn't just my stand anymore, it was ours. And Olivia, she had finally been handed something she didn't know how to perform her way out of. Silence. Real, final, isolating silence. And something told me, deep in my gut, that she wouldn't stay quiet for long. The morning of the wedding arrived not with fanfare or nerves, but with a kind of still, deliberate clarity that felt almost eerie in its calmness, as if the world around me understood that something long overdue was finally happening. Not just the ceremony itself, not just the exchange of vows and the quiet clink of champagne glasses beneath flowering arches, but the full and final closing of a chapter I had unknowingly been writing in pencil for most of my life, always tentative, always erasing pieces of myself to make space for someone else's narrative. But that morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, stepping into the dress that Olivia had once described in detail as her dream silhouette, I realized that what I had once feared would be seen as petty had instead become something far more powerful. It had become a reclamation. The dress fit like it had been stitched with intention, hugging me in all the right places, elegant without being ostentatious, understated yet undeniably commanding. And as I looked at my reflection, I felt none of the doubt or guilt I'd expected to carry into that day. Instead, there was a quiet kind of satisfaction in knowing that I hadn't stolen anything. No, I had simply refused to forfeit anymore. The flowers, carefully arranged in a palette Olivia had once gushed over while showing me a board full of digital swatches, stood proudly on either side of the aisle, and the scent of lavender and peonies hung in the air like a soft defiance. Everything, from the table linens to the live string quartet, tucked discreetly near the edge of the vineyard, was a reminder not of her, but of me, of what I had allowed, endured, and finally decided to end. Guests began to arrive just after 11, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration as they took in the setting, the weather, the palpable absence of drama. My closest friends, those who had watched this unfold from the sidelines, whispered words of support and disbelief. Some of them admitting only now that they'd always known something about Olivia didn't quite add up, but had never dared say it out loud. Even my Aunt Karen, who had once called Olivia the sunbeam of the family, pulled me aside to say, "She might be loud, Rachel, but this is louder." Michael, standing near the altar in a tailored suit that made him look like the calm before a storm, smiled when he saw me walk down the path. And in his eyes, I saw something that melted away the last fragments of hesitation. Because he didn't just love me, he respected what this wedding stood for. And that, more than anything, made me feel not like a woman staging a retaliation, but like one finally building her life without apology. The ceremony began without incident, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, Olivia would choose silence after all, that she would sit in her house, arms crossed, fuming in her robe, too proud to show up and be seen as second to anything. But pride is a tricky thing. It masquerades as dignity until it starts to itch, and Olivia was never good at being ignored. Right as we signed the license, midway through polite laughter and applause, I heard a rustle from the far end of the venue, and before I even turned, I knew. She was wearing white. Not cream, not blush, not floral, white. Floor-length, designer, paired with a pearl clutch and a face that said, "This isn't over." She didn't walk in exactly. She marched, a deliberate procession down the center of the gravel path, like some forgotten bride reclaiming her altar, though there was no groom, no bouquet, no invitation, just her, alone. Glowing with something that wasn't joy or love, but desperation veiled in confidence. And the silence she received was deafening. No one stood, no one clapped. The music stopped. Even the officiant faltered, unsure whether to proceed or pause. Olivia stood there, arms at her sides, lips slightly parted like she'd been preparing a monologue that no one asked for, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't loud, but it cut. "I just wanted to say congratulations," she said, her voice tight with effort. "It takes a special kind of person to do what you did." And in that moment, standing there in front of everyone, I realized that she still didn't get it. She still believed this was about revenge, about some juvenile need to win, to upstage, to steal. She didn't understand that it was never about her, not really. It was about the years I gave away, the birthdays she overshadowed, the dinners she dominated, the dreams I shrank because I didn't want to cause waves, so I walked toward her, heels crunching over gravel, eyes locked on hers, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far heavier, release. And when I stopped just in front of her, I leaned in and said, calmly, without theatrics, "This wasn't about you, Olivia. That's the part that's killing you, isn't it?" Her expression cracked then, not fully, but just enough for the corners of her mouth to twitch, for her eyes to widen in that flash of panic that comes when someone realizes the game is over and they were the only one still playing. And then she turned, without another word, clutching her dress in one hand, and storming out the way she came. Michael placed his hand on my back as I returned to the ceremony. The officiant quietly resumed his script, and the applause that followed when we were finally pronounced felt different. Less about tradition, more about recognition. Not everyone in that vineyard knew the full story, but they knew enough. They saw what they needed to see. The rest of the day unfolded without interruption. Laughter flowed, wine was poured, stories were shared, and the memory of Olivia's intrusion faded like an unwelcome breeze that had passed too quickly to matter. People danced. My father, quiet for most of the drama, whispered during our dance, "I don't know all the details, but I'm proud of you." And that was enough. Later that night, after the guests had gone, after the lights dimmed and the band packed up their instruments, I sat alone for a few minutes, under the same arch where we had said our vows. I pulled out my phone, not to scroll, not to post, but to check something. The group chat had gone quiet again. No follow-ups, no fallout, just silence, except one message. From Olivia, blocked. I could have unblocked her, could have responded, could have opened the door for another cycle of explanation and justification, but instead I set the phone down, folded my hands in my lap, and stared out at the dark silhouette of the vineyard, lit faintly by the last flickers of string lights and moonlight. There was no perfect ending, no ribbon tied around the mess, just peace. And for the first time in a very long time, it was loud enough,